Hello, and welcome back to Elle's Sci-Fi Book Club. I'm Elle Cordova.
I'm Grace Yost.
And we are here to discuss Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep this month. Great book, great selection to our Patreon voters. This is a Philip K. Dick classic. He is, of course, the author of many notable sci-fi works like Scanner Darkly, Man in a High Castle. The list goes on and on. This is probably his most well-known book. And what's it about?
Sure, yeah. So just to bring everybody's memories of this back to the surface, so we're in sort of a dystopian near future, technically our near past. What is it? It's
2021 in our edition. I think it was in the 90s before, and then they updated it.
Okay. So
now it's still in the past, though.
Still in the past, so, but, dystopian world. So by this point, there's been this horrible, destructive war called World War Terminus, leaving the Earth as this sort of shattered ruin of what it once was. It's a very bleak place. A lot of people have fled the situation to live off-world, but some people remain. Some people can't escape because they are what is called special, meaning they've been suffered the effects of radiation and have a lowered IQ levels. Some people stay because their jobs are still here. And so our main character is Rick Deckard, who is a bounty hunter, and his job is to hunt down androids who have made their way to Earth. So androids, kind of like we talked about with iRobot a few months ago. If you've read that, androids are supposed to be part of this off-world project, but sometimes they come back to Earth. They're not supposed to be there. And so it's the job of somebody like Rick Deckard to hunt them down and destroy them. So he is one of our protagonists that we're kind of seeing this destroyed world through. And then our other protagonist is J.R. Isidore, who is one of these specials, so somebody who's been negatively affected by radiation. He has this sad, lonely existence. He's living all alone in this apartment building that's just falling to pieces around him. He has this depressing job, and then he is, briefly harboring some of the androids that Deckard is hunting. So we have both perspectives on this world. The novel asks really interesting questions about the nature of humanity. What's the difference between being an android and a human? Can you tell that there's a difference? What kinds of things make humanity distinct, or is that just a blurry boundary in general? Lots of really fascinating questions, and I'd say very few concrete answers.
Yeah.
A very disorienting novel, some elements of film noir, and of course, and we'll talk about this later, obviously a major part of the reception history of this is that it spawned, of course, the very famous Blade Runner film franchise.
And the subsequent Blade Runner 2049.
Yes,
Yep.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, a fascinating book. We can see why it stood the test of time. And yeah, it asks so many questions. I think you kind of nailed it. At the heart of it is the question of the blurred lines between what makes a human being and what makes an android an android. And does it matter?
And does it matter?
Yeah.
Right. So what did you think of it? Just your general impressions. Well, also, have you read this before? Or is this your first time through?
So I read this a while ago, like so long ago that it was almost like reading it for the first time for me again, especially in the wake of, in our book club, having read iRobot and sort of Asimov's ideas about robots and the questions he was asking. I think reading it, having just read Asimov's version of this, is a totally different experience. So this was interesting to me. I really loved it. I mean, I think I have some issues with it. Obviously, that it was written in the 60s, and one can tell. I mean, the descriptions of women are left a little bit to be desired. Philip K. Dick was a man of the time, and we can't really hold him to the same standards, perhaps, that we would today. Certainly was a little tiring reading about women's figures and the breasts that bounce and smile at you and just all those things. But the ideas are really interesting. What did you think?
Well, I promise I have read some books in my life, but once again, this is me encountering for the first time a classic people have been appreciating for decades. So, I've seen the movie, but then, of course, it was really fascinating to read it. Yeah, I don't know. I felt, I'm sure we'll talk more about it, but it's sort of disoriented in a really interesting way reading it. I am most reminded, if you've had the chance to read some of the other books that we've discussed, this does remind me, as you just said, most of iRobot in terms of writing style and perspective, and even some of the details about, androids being confined usually to off-world and those types of questions. It was kind of felt a little similar. Also in writing style, there's kind of I think part of the reason I feel a little disoriented by this book is we just came from 2 books where I felt very aware of the protagonist's mental state and, the way they're thinking about things.
Parable of the Sower and Left Hand of Darkness for anyone who hasn't been following along.
Right. Great books, and this is also great, but I feel several steps removed, as I did with Asimov. I didn't feel like I had access to Deckard's emotional state, maybe a little bit more to Isidore's emotional state and his kind of confusion. But I felt, sort of confused at times. I think I'm supposed to feel confused.
Yes, absolutely. He is trying to disorient you. I think we're supposed to be confused as Deckard is confused about whether or not he's a human being. I'm not even sure, and we'll get into this, I'm not sure if the question of whether he is a human or an android was fully answered in the book. Other people believe it absolutely was answered, that he was a human being the whole time, and that it's definitively proven. I actually don't think so.
Interesting. Okay.
But I think the world feels really well built. I mean, it's beautifully done. The idea of these like hulking husks of empty buildings where decay and disorder are slowly taking over, and it's this human enterprise of trying to like push back entropy and kipple. We should get into that because that's a central theme of the book. But this idea of sort of an empty world that's just been destroyed and people are trying desperately to have some sort of semblance of order is interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone who's there, it's people who can't leave. Either they're not allowed to, that the specials are not allowed to leave, and then or their jobs keep them there, which is maybe one possible explanation why Deckard is there as a bounty hunter and making his living. But it's a bleak existence where a lot of life has gone extinct, and having a living pet is sort of a symbol of a status symbol, so much so that you have to have a fake one if you don't have a real one. And
a status symbol, and also like a litmus test for how empathetic you are, which is somehow separates you from the android. Like the more empathetic you are, the more human. And if you're not able to care for an animal, or like the maintenance and care of an animal then helps build your empathy. There's something about that. And then with the empathy boxes, which are, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I've read, it seems like the empathy boxes, they have 2 handles, and then it plugs them into sort of a VR world where they can all sort of share emotions with other humans in the world all at once.
Yeah, that's and maybe even outside, like right in the, because aren't humans scattered? I don't know how far it reaches, but yes, you can. It's a communal experience of the possibly fictitious life of Wilbur Mercer. Yeah,
absolutely fictitious. I think we learned.
Or.
Yeah, so let's talk about Mercerism. Right. So this is interesting.
Yes.
So it seems like Philip K. Dick has built a world where, in order to be human, you must have empathy. And empathy is not necessarily like, I guess, a given in certain quantities. And in order to have more empathy, one would regularly maintain that, be in touch with it. And then through this idea of Mercerism, following the teachings of Wilbur Mercer, who's supposed to be some sort of all-knowing, like, immortal alien who, like, goes through this quest of, the symbolic quest of climbing a mountain, sort of a messiah figure.
Is he an alien, or I couldn't figure out what he's supposed to be?
I think people thought of him as an outworlder.
I think that's right. The actual life story, his actual life story is a little bit obscure to me, but yeah.
I think he's supposed to be an all-knowing being, a wise being from another world. But then it comes out, of course, that he's a fake figure, and that it was like on a soundstage. All the footage was recorded on a soundstage by some alcoholic nobody actor who played bit roles and things and had lines that he was supposed to recite.
Or at least that's what the possibly android
machines,
Buster friendly have circulated as in this report. Almost like the moon landing being fake, the way it was all on the soundstage. It sort of has that conspiracy theory ethos. But then, our like Deckard is still like somehow seeing, there's like, I don't know, there people are having visions. So it's sort of, kind of another point of the book is making, sort of destabilizing what is real and what is not real, and whether it matters if it's all fake, if it still is giving people these meaningful experiences of empathy.
Right, which one
Yeah.
could say about all religions.
Yeah. The entire book has this kind of these kernels of doubt. So I was like, oh, okay, it's fake. And then I'm thinking like, but then,
Was it fake?
yeah, the androids are the ones who are conveying that, and we're not really...
They
we
have a
don't-
vested
yeah.
interest in exposing it for being a fake,
Yes.
even if it's not a fake, because it is supposed to be the one thing that they can't partake in. They can't have empathy, so they can't share in whatever it is, emotional exchange that it gives. So they want to take it down because they want there to be no distinction. They want to be able to be equal, if not superior, to
Exactly.
humans. Right. So it could very well be that they fabricated this whole actor and like the idea that it was a soundstage. But then I think we also have to wonder, how is it that people, when they're plugged into this thing, they get physical wounds on their body?
Yeah.
I guess I'm trying to understand the technology, like maybe it isn't fake because if it can give you physical wounds and make you bleed, then...
Right, or maybe your brain is fooled in some way. It's like in the Matrix, not to talk endlessly about other science fiction films, but if you are killed in the Matrix, your body like reacts as if it's been killed. Maybe there's some kind of thing going on with you're injured there, you're injured in the real world. But yeah, that's one of the many parts of the book where I felt I wasn't totally understanding the tech. Or the mood boxes. Is that what it's called? Mood box?
The mood organ.
Mood organ.
Penfield
Right.
mood organs, yeah. But I feel like all the tech in the book kind of serves that same purpose of regulating the human mind to, it seems like in some ways, become more human or temper down what makes you human. And like all the tech seems to serve this purpose of like delineating humanity from android,
Right.
And in the case of the mood organ, it's like we have mastery over our emotions and, we can feel however we want to feel. And that to me almost strikes me as like less human. It's like making yourself more of a machine.
I know. I think that also struck me. And then maybe it's advantageous. So people who are still stuck on Earth for whatever reason, they can't leave or their job is here, or whatever. These things are highly valuable. It's like I'm not this status. I'm still this status. I have control over these things, or I can care for an animal, and I actually do care about that animal, or I can experience empathy with mercerism. These are people presumably at the lowest rung of society if you can't be away. So how valuable would it be for you to have something that makes you better than what's below you, which is the androids?
And then there's more stratification within that. There are the specials who are above androids but below non-specials, and then even within specials it seems like you have like chicken heads and then ant heads, which are even supposed to be lower IQ.
Yeah, it's kind of a grim, it's an extremely depressing world that people find themselves in.
Right,
Yeah.
and the stratification, the social classes, that reminds me a little bit of A Brave New World, which we haven't read in this book club. But
and I, of course, haven't read. I've only read
well, that's
4
why
books.
we're doing this. It's to build these foundations,
Right, totally.
But I think the question that I keep coming back to, and it's still sticking with me, I just finished it like 2 days ago, and I keep thinking about it. And what's like in my mind is Rick Deckard an android, and how do we know for sure that he is human? It seems like the consensus, I did a little browsing, the consensus is that he is a human. Mm-hmm. But how do we know that? Like, what's the evidence?
Right, because broadly that idea, the porous... or not porous distinction. It's more just sort of a blurred distinction between humanity and being an android. And I think we're left, a lot of the characters, we're not always perfectly sure. And then Deckard is like the most extreme version of that, because you're wondering, he has that encounter with Luba Luft, the opera singer. It's like, hey, why don't you take the test first?
Yeah.
And he's sort of like...
It stops him in his tracks.
It stops him in his tracks. He's like, what? But notably, he doesn't.
Mm-hmm. He never does.
No.
But he does have empathy. We know
Right.
that from seeing his interior thoughts. He especially has empathy for androids, which he's not supposed to have.
Well, especially women.
Especially women.
Right.
Especially the one he sleeps with,
Well, but then also opera singer. That's
Yeah.
the one that derails him a little. It
Yeah.
makes him feel kind of, I don't know, that was I didn't like that. I didn't like doing that. And then we're invited to compare Deckard to, what's his name, Philip Resch?
Yeah,
Resch.
the other bounty hunter.
Yes, the other bounty hunter, who also were sort of question mark. That's in that kind of confusing interlude where he gets arrested and taken to a different police station. One of the many parts of the book, which is completely disorienting, because all of a sudden you're like, wait, oh, so...
It's a fake police station?
Right, yes.
Yes.
So Phil Resch, we're invited to compare him with Deckard, because, of course, they're both in the same role. And initially, I think there's a suggestion that, oh, no, Resch is maybe also an android, but then he does the test, and he's just sort of like a little bit sociopathic about androids, but he himself is a human. At least that's what the test reveals. Meanwhile, Deckard never takes a test and has empathy for the androids. So it's complicated.
But then, see, what complicates it even further for me, and this is why I'm not sure that Deckard is a human being. I think it's strange that we've seen throughout the novel that androids don't feel, obviously they don't feel empathy for humans and living creatures like the poor spider, which was a terrible sequence that like really bugged me.
Me too. Did it bug you?
No pun intended. So that we know that about androids. They don't have empathy for humans or living things. They do seem to have empathy for each other. Yes. Like you hear Beatty calling out in pain when his wife, android, Irmgard or whatever, Irmgard. I don't know.
Some of the women's names, though, the men are Rick and then the women are Iran, And
yeah, interesting names. But anyway, his partner, when she's killed, he has like a moment of anguish. So he clearly has empathy for other androids. They seem to care about each other. And the fact that Deckard's main empathy seems to come for androids, seems to go for androids, and we don't see as much for human beings, makes me wonder that just because he's showing empathy toward androids, it doesn't necessarily mean that that he's a human being.
That's a really good point, because he doesn't seem to have like a great relationship with his wife.
No. In fact, it really seems like he lacks empathy for her.
Yes. Yeah, but
then she's like this depressive, which is another sexist depiction of women in the book. But yeah, she's this like depressive who seems to want to wallow in her like negative emotions. You could argue she's doing it to like be more in touch with her emotions. She doesn't want to be, filed over by the Penfield mood organ. But he has very little patience for her. He's not ever like, oh, I can't wait to get home and like hang out with my wife. It's just sort of like, oh, this ball and chain sitting at home, I better provide, do my duty. I don't know. It strikes me that the people that he most seems to resonate with are the androids in the book. And that's how the androids are with each other. So
that's a really good point in favor of him being an android. And I don't know so the vibe is that people think it's definitively proven that he's a human because of the empathy. And then
from just my combing of like Reddit and like our Discord and just in the conversations I've seen where other people talk about this, but it really seems like people want to believe that he is a human and that it was like proven and we need to like let that go. I just don't think it was. And I think Philip K. Dick was trying intentionally to not answer that question.
Yeah. Like we know that the androids that he has killed, well, most of them, I think it's like clear that they're androids, right?
Yeah.
That they're like on this list. They know about themselves. They're kind of very clear about that. But then there's Resch, apparently because of the test, is not an android and is sort of cold and sociopathic with the androids. But Deckard, I think if Philip K. Dick wanted to really close the loop on that, then he would have had him take a test in the fake police station even.
Yep.
And don't you think we're supposed to wonder how useful it is to police the border between humanity and artificial life in this? Aren't we invited to kind of see? So Deckard has that emotional reaction to finding the toad, and he's so excited. He thinks like, oh, finally, like I've just found this animal in the wild, and he treasures it. And then the wife is like, actually, it's
electric.
Right. But then that's still a real emotion, just as with Mercerism, even if that is a fake story, ? Probably the book, I mean, that would be perfectly reasonable to think that from reading the book, but it does have a real impact on the characters. So maybe it's...
And Isidore decides it doesn't matter.
Right.
He decides that, well, I don't care if this is an actor on a soundstage. It means something to me, and it means something to a lot of people. And somehow through that box, they are able to share emotions. And that seems to be a coping mechanism that works for a lot of people. And so, like, let them have it, whether it's real or not.
Right.
Which I think is also a commentary on religion in general.
Right.
And it doesn't, in the end, Dick seems to be saying it doesn't necessarily matter whether this thing is based on something real or not, as long as people believe and it's giving something to them.
Right. I guess like in terms of the tech, do you think that it's a point against a point that Deckard is a human that he can use the empathy box?
So that's another thing that people point to.
Right.
Yeah, that he's able to use the empathy box and he's able to be hurt by it and, but he doesn't seem to get anything from it other than...
Yeah, it does seem like he's not as into it as other people are.
Yeah. So we don't know what the android's experience is trying to use that box.
Right.
We've never seen in the book, we don't see any other androids trying to use it. Maybe they get in there and they see the vision and they don't feel any emotion. We don't know what that would look like.
Yeah, that's often in this book. There's nothing that you can quite compare it to separate it completely. Yeah.
Right. I love the idea of the Voight-Kampff test because, that I think he's playing a little bit with like the idea of a Turing test, Alan Turing, who came up with this idea that the second you would be able to have a conversation, like a masked conversation with an android and not be able to tell that it's an android you're talking to, that's when it then passes the test. And it doesn't matter whether it's an android or a human, it ceases to matter. And this is sort of a version of that. It's like, can the android simulate human responses so well that the human can't tell the difference? If it passes that point, then does it even matter that it's an android?
Right. And then you have people, extremists like Resch, who would say it does matter and we should be cold and calculating. We should have this binary view. It doesn't matter that Luba Luft is
talented.
Loves art and is, Deckard is blown away by her performance. That does not matter. It's like just a really binary black and white thinking.
And he would say there has to be a way that we can always root them out because they are fundamentally different from us. They're fundamentally less than us.
Yeah.
We should always be able to develop. And he's so confident that we would always be able to get another test and be more precise, find them, root them out, and kill them.
Right. With his presence, we really, I think, relate more to Deckard. I had a little bit of a hard time relating to Deckard for a lot of this, some of the decisions he's making. But then as it becomes more sympathetic with the androids, I found myself becoming more sympathetic with him as a character.
Yeah, I think Isidore is an easier point of entry in some ways.
Yes.
You relate to him. He's like showing compassion and, you worry about him the whole time. I just kept thinking, like, what are these androids going to do to this poor man? It's like watching a sheep with a bunch of wolves just toying with it. I was worried the entire time that they were going to just mess this guy up.
Yeah, and maybe that's a commentary. I think we'll get back to entropy, which you were talking about earlier. But, his sort of like, he can't stop himself from degrading based on it's a sort of like a bad place to be in. You could be slipping further.
He knows he is.
Yeah.
He knows eventually he just stops thinking altogether. He gets further degraded.
Right. And so it's a really awful existence. And then we have the machines, which won't degrade under those circumstances. Except they have, I guess technology, but they won't degrade in the same way that his intelligence will. And,
right.
Yeah.
Well, the force that is working on the androids that pushes them toward degradation and disorder is really the bounty hunter. Rick Deckard becomes a force of entropy, and we talk about that. Let's talk about this because this is the second book now in our book club that has really dealt directly with like the second law of thermodynamics, which is, everything tends toward disorder, chaos. Things unmake themselves and don't get remade unless a certain amount of effort is put in. So this idea of Kipple, which Dick coined, that's a word he made up in this book. The idea of Kipple meaning like disorder or like messy things. Isidore explains it. He's like, if you have papers lying around and just various pieces of disorder, you go to bed, you wake up, there are more the next day. The universe tends toward disorder. It wants to unmake itself. And eventually, he says, we'll end up in a state of total Kippleization, which is like everything has just become undone, and then there'll be nothing. It's really a powerful image to imagine this lone chicken head, this lone, guy left behind on a world where a lot of people got to leave and escape, and now he's left in this sort of decaying building, all alone, nobody else there, and the Kipple is sort of like infiltrating, and it's every day he fights to keep at least his place in order, and meanwhile his brain is actually unraveling, and so you have this like human endeavor to fight against entropy, which is kind of all of our struggle. We all have this, where we all try to, live as long as we can until one day, all the heat in our body leaves and we become part of the disorder. So you have that going on with Isidore, but then you also have Rick Deckard as a force of undoing. He specifically says at some point in the book, he says, I unmake things.
Yeah.
Where he's like, he talks about the Rosen Association. They make things and then I unmake them. Mm-hmm. So he himself is an agent of entropy, of Kipple.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that the one thing that they could do, you're not supposed to have the androids on Earth. And that's sort of like, that seems to be the only type of thing that can survive and thrive on the planet.
Yeah.
And it's just like bigotry that is stopping people from taking advantage of that. Some of the androids, various androids, well, I guess specifically Inspector Garland and then Luba Luft are trying to assimilate into a human society. And it just seems very, like, what is the point of rooting them out?
Yeah. Bigotry,
right.
Bias, as you said. And it seems like when they first were rolled out, they were rolled out as like slaves, like a form of, laborer that would go out and do its bidding, do our bidding, and colonize off-world locations because it's dangerous and difficult work, similar to iRobot, Asimov's view. And they cannot be allowed on the planet. But like you said, it's like in this post-apocalyptic world, why not send them back?
Yeah.
Have them help, usher in an era where we can get rid of the Kipple and start again.
Well, and I think about poor Isidore, who is like despised, and kind of, I mean, he's like, the people at his job seem like okay to him, maybe not great. They're not great.
Like his boss is actively toying with him.
Yeah, that's true. Yes.
Not as bad as the androids are, but
right.
Yeah. But
that's why he lets them in. He's just living this extremely lonely existence.
Yeah, there's a really sad moment where he's like walking back to his apartment and they're in there and he's thinking like, now that I've had these friends here, I wouldn't be able to exist without them.
Oh,
it would be too horrible.
Yeah.
I can't be alone again.
Right, just utterly alone in the building, and just, the empathy box is probably at least you'd feel a sense of community, and maybe that's like part of it, so you can make it on the Earth if you have access to that. But yeah, I don't know. It's so sad. His journey in particular was very sad.
And I think somebody like him gets the most out of the empathy box, because then Rick was saying one of the problems he had was, his wife has this moment of joy that she experiences when he buys that, what does he buy? Was it a sheep? No, not a goat.
Yeah.
He buys a real goat, right?
Yep.
Brings it home before it's eventually killed by Rachel. There's that moment of just sheer joy that he and his wife feel having this real animal. And it's like this moment of like, they've worked so hard, or he's worked so hard for this, and now she gets to just revel in this joy. And her first thought is, I need to go share this with the empathy box so that others can feel some of this joy.
Yeah.
And then Rick points out like, but if you do that, you lose it.
Yeah.
You give it away. And she's like, but there are other days when I feel low and I get other people's joy.
Right.
So you think about somebody like Isidore. He feels, what does he have in his life other than maybe he gets other people's joy from the empathy box?
Right. I guess he just has like the slight satisfaction of knowing that he currently isn't as degraded as some of the other people, and that's it.
Yeah, he does it as well as he can do at his job.
Yes.
Yeah. He has Buster Friendly, who he seems to enjoy the programming.
Yeah.
And it turns out Buster Friendly, it seems like it's, in the beginning we see it as like this mode of propaganda. It's just saying like, come off world, but there's a utopia here for you, and these androids take care of you and everything. And of course, somebody like Isidore can never do that.
Yeah.
So we know they're androids from the beginning, though, because they're programming 48 hours a day. Like half of it's radio and half's television. It's impossible.
Right.
So
right, and that seems very clear. And so like their motives in busting the Mercerism thing are kind of, suspect and everything. But, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. What do you think about, going along with this? Do androids dream of electric sheep?
Do they?
I thought, not having read this, I thought that I didn't realize there would literally be an electric sheep in the story. I thought it would be like something like a way of asking, Do androids have the same sort of ability to dream and ability to imagine things as like people do? And how would their dreams be different?
I think that is the question, though.
Right.
Rick asked that.
Right.
Do androids dream? He doesn't say of electric sheep, but he asked if they dream, and then he said evidently they do, because he's talking about they have these plans for themselves.
Right.
They have visions of how they could live in society.
Yeah.
So they do dream.
Yeah.
But the question of like, do they dream of electric sheep? I wonder if I'm trying to think of what does Philip K. Dick mean by that? Is it like, do they dream of, having, I don't know, do they dream of having empathy?
Right. Yeah.
Of tending to things and caring the way that we do?
Right. Exactly. Or are there like my repository for empathy? Would it necessarily be an electric being versus an organic being if I'm an android or something?
Yeah.
Along the lines of what you were saying before, it was like androids have empathy for each other, but only really each other, and not really for human life.
Yeah, which is an interesting development.
Yeah,
you can also imagine how a group of beings that were created specifically to be exploited,
right,
would just never develop any sort of feelings for their exploiters.
Right, understandably so.
Yeah. So if they have the capacity for empathy, why would they extend it to us?
Right.
I specifically wanted to touch on the Luba, what was it?
I think it's Luba Luft,
Luba Luft.
German, yeah.
Character and the whole musical interlude, because this is Grace's specialty. For any who didn't know, she is a professor of music history. So I wanted to ask, I'm not very familiar with the magic flute.
Right.
And that really the whole world of opera. So why do you think Philip K. Dick had that like interlude, and what does it mean? That's
so interesting. I'll say off the bat, I'm not an opera scholar. I'm an opera fan. I've taught. Will teach it sometimes, but I don't want to position myself as the leading expert on Mozart. But so if you happen to have heard
the program,
yeah,
it's the whole reason I had you here.
Yeah, exactly. This is like the one tiny bit of this where I'll have a slight edge over Elle in terms of qualifications, like this one little thing. Although I will say you're opera curious. Don't you think?
I mean, Grace and I went to the Ring Cycle. I was dragged perhaps to the Ring Cycle, Wagner's Ring Cycle, but I actually really enjoyed it.
Well, to be fair to her, it's not always the easiest sell to say, would you like to watch like 15 hours of opera?
Yeah, that's a lot for a newcomer.
Yeah. Should we start off with the 15 hours? So it is maybe but it is really interesting. And maybe I'm sure there are people here who are also opera enthusiasts, but if you're not, you don't have to be a fancy person to like it. That's what I always say.
That's true. It does help to have a friend whispering into your ear like all the crucial things to know.
Right. But I will say, so I love it. Anytime, I'm not a snob, like anytime any movie or any book has something about opera in it, I'm excited,
So what was exciting here? How does it function in the book?
Well, this is really fascinating. This is the most interesting allusion to an opera I think I've ever read.
Oh, cool.
It's really interesting. So what's going on? So of course, this is the scene where Deckard is trying to find Luba Luft, opera singer, and he goes to a rehearsal. They're doing the magic flute. Magic flute is opera, technically Singspiel, written by Mozart, very famous composer. One of the last ones he wrote before he died very young, and Deckard mentions that in the scene. So he's going to the rehearsal, and when I saw, they're doing the magic flute, and there's going to be an android involved, I thought that probably she would be playing the role of the villain in that opera. And the villain is the Queen of the Night. That probably rings bells for people. If you know any part of the magic flute, you'd probably know her. She's the villain, but she's also everyone's favorite character, sort of like Miranda Priestley, Ursula vibes, like step on my face with a stiletto, powerful woman.
Yeah.
Like she has the best music. So I thought, she'll probably be playing the role of the villain. It'll be this like fun commentary. But instead she's playing the role of Pamina, who is in fact one of the central couple.
Oh.
So she's not the villain. She's playing this kind of leading role, and the part of the opera that they're doing is not one of the parts that you would remember if you watched it. They're doing it's like this right before the end of the first act. They just do like a little interlude. It's not something that you would necessarily remember from having seen it. But in the opera, in the context of the opera, this is like right before Pamina finally meets Tamino, the hero of the opera. They already know about each other, and because it's an opera, they're already in love. He saw a picture of her. She's just heard about him. They're already into each other. It's very easy to find somebody in the world of opera. So they're about to meet, and then once they meet, they're going to go through trials and reach enlightenment together.
Okay.
And the whole thing is, The Magic Flute is really a bizarre opera. Honestly, it's not my favorite. Hot take.
Hot take.
Hot.
You heard it here first,
take.
folks.
Hot take. Yeah, I don't care who knows it though. It's a little bit bizarre. The whole thing, it's an allegory for the Freemasons. Mozart was part of the secret society, so it's all about like, you know, in the secret society you get initiated and you work on self-improvement and self-enlightenment, that kind of thing. So in the opera, that's an allegory. Like, main man meets main woman. They go through the trials. Eventually, they go through these trials together. So in the world of the book, we have our main male character about to meet this woman, and they are going to go through their own little trial together, where they have this spar where he's trying to test her, and she's like foiling him in these really intriguing ways. And they are also on a journey toward enlightenment. Like, she's going to die, almost, you know, with Resh, I think, kills her. But this is going to be part of his enlightenment. And I thought that was just really interesting. So it's not I would have been thrilled if she were playing the villain of the opera. That would have been totally fascinating. But instead, I think we're supposed to see her in a much more sympathetic light. And it's makes me think Philip K. Dick probably knew quite a bit about opera to pick an odd moment and to have the robot or the android in a more positive light on the road to enlightenment.
Interesting. Yeah. It's fascinating that he wouldn't cast her as the sort of antagonist.
Yeah, no, instead they're supposed to be, they're like destined to become, they are a couple and they survive the events of the opera.
Yeah.
But in this kind of miserable world, you know, they are sort of well matched in a way, almost like she's more interesting and I think than Rachel in certain ways. Like, Rachel's like a femme fatale film noir character, but Luba Luft is you know, she appreciates, you know, she's been like studying her score. Deckard is blown away by her artistry, so I think that's part of why in general, so I think there's a really interesting intertextual reading there, but I think just her talent, and he's blown away by it, and he's obviously an opera enthusiast. Somehow they're putting on operas even though the world is ending, which I thought was interesting.
Well, do what you can to fight the kipple.
To fight the kipple, yeah, but I think then it's like, wow, so doesn't this person have some kind of access to humanity if they are so stunning? And then you feel like when she's killed, you're kind of, you know,
what a waste.
Right. She's fascinating. She's a fascinating character, and
whereas
she didn't deserve it.
Phil, the bounty hunter, sees her as just like any other machine. It doesn't matter how well she sings. And that kind of reminds me a little bit of, you know, this is how I feel as well. When I see these beautiful images generated by AI now in our world, sometimes I'm struck by how beautiful the image is. And then when I learn that it's AI, it just takes all the joy out of the art for me. And I'm like, I don't want to see that in my feed. I don't want to have that on my album art.
Right.
You know, I don't want to really be associated with it, because to me it actually does matter that this thing came from a human being. And I think Phil's you know, reaction to her is that way, where it's just sort of like, I don't care how beautifully she sings. She's a machine and she should go.
Right. No, and that's a good point. I think there's a difference between AI, which is just regurgitating our own creativity back at us, and then the sentient android.
Is there a difference? Because that's what she's doing too, you could say. Luba Luft, you know, she's synthesizing everything she knows about opera. She's using her vocal cords in ways that she knows will be beautiful to us. You know, it is a similar thing. It's just going on at a higher level. But I guess that's what we do too with our own creativity. We're synthesizing everything we've ever learned, read, you know, consumed, and we're spitting it back at everybody else.
Yeah, we're training, we're studying. Well, I think maybe it's also that there's like an overt AI is like networked with everything. The androids aren't on like some internet network, like pulling creativity from everything, right? Aren't they? They have memories that are implanted. They're like more individualized.
Yeah.
So I think it's more interesting to hear her perform.
Yeah, we don't know how they're encoded with their consciousness is. Like, we don't know how Luba Luft got to be so talented, like whether she was programmed with that talent or whether she developed it over years. Like, we don't really know how these things came about.
Right. They talk about memories being implants.
Yeah.
But it is unclear, why would an android be trained in opera? Is it just something that she wanted to do, I guess?
Or she trained herself so
Right.
she could have a job when she came to the
Yeah.
planet. It's hard to say.
Yeah, but it's just an absolutely lovely moment in the book. And then I think we do feel, or at least I've definitely felt, like having her just murdered. Then you think, oh,
Yeah.
you know.
I think probably the most powerful scene for me in the book was, and maybe you could see it as the climax, is when, well, obviously Deckard is having the showdown with the final androids. He arrives, but that scene where it's like the Buster Friendly's big reveal of how Mercerism is potentially fake,
Right.
interlaced with this terrible like torturing of the spider. And Isidore is sort of, you just see, and what I love about it is we're not in the point of view of Isidore, really. We don't see his like emotional reaction. We can just see him in the background sort of cringing
Yeah.
and saying something every now and then. And it's just this like matter-of-fact description of the spider and how it refuses to move, with its 4 legs, and it's like, I can make it move, and they take out the lighter. The whole thing is just so terrible.
Yeah.
But it really gets us back, I think, into the mindset of these androids need to go.
Right.
Like, don't feel too bad when they're all just
Right.
gotten rid of, because look at this, that they're capable of such evil, such caring for each other, but such evil toward everyone else.
Right. And then we have to wonder, like, as you were alluding to earlier, if the humans are kind of to blame for that, for creating them and have to lead such miserable lives.
Like exploiting them. Or would they be like this either way, whether we treated them well from the beginning?
Right.
If they have the capacity to treat a living thing like that.
Well, right. Or Rachel's viciousness, where like...
Yeah, where she kills his goat. Right.
Yeah. That is like kind of, I think the noir elements in the book, to me at least, maybe this is just a visual bias or something, but it's more overt in the film version adaptation, very highly loose adaptation. But there are a few things that make this very noir-y, and one is that she is a classic femme fatale character. And then also the sort of protagonist being kind of confused, the model of an investigation, a detective type story is very noir-y.
Yeah.
A lot of the classic films noir are real confusing in terms of plot.
Yeah, I mean, I think the disorientation is where maybe the central defining feature of this novel, just how thrown into the abyss we feel when, especially we get to that scene with the fake police station.
Yes.
Everything is topsy-turvy there. We don't know who's real. We don't know who's an android, who's a human, whether his job is all just implants. Like, we don't know, who's pretending and who's not.
Yeah, there's a lot of parts of that where we're just, who is an android, who is a human, like we were saying before. It's just, you feel unmoored reading it. And of course, that kind of makes you sympathetic with Deckard, who's kind of going through his own crisis about that. What
do we make of the ending where, he has this confrontation, he wins, he retires all of the androids that he's supposed to retire, leaving Isidore alone, of course.
Yeah.
And then he comes back to see that his sheep has been killed by Rachel, and then he goes and has that Mercerian sort of trek up the hill outside of San Francisco.
Right.
He tries to visit his friend Dave Holden or whatever his name is, the guy, other bounty hunter that got injured.
Tries to call. Yeah.
I think and then he won't accept any visitors.
Right.
Because he's too injured or whatever. But anyway, he ends up alone going up that hill, having a little Mercer-like experience, and then finds a toad which he thinks is real and connected to Mercer, and it turns out to just be electric. Brings it home. His wife convinces him it still has value. He takes a nap. She makes coffee. Like, what are we to take from the ending?
I guess I'd say that it's a transformative moment, and maybe it's still kind of what we were saying earlier. There's still a transformation, even if it isn't, even if it's not what he initially thought. Or, at the end, this is page 221 in our edition. Once again, my edition is in much better shape than Elle's edition.
I've had it for a little while.
I'll turn the pages to let the people see. Let the people know.
Actually, this is really good for me. This is really good. There are a couple little blemishes, but for the most part.
I did just buy this, so to be fair. But
fair.
On page 221, she says, maybe I shouldn't have told you about it being electrical. She put her hand out, touched his arm. She felt guilty seeing the effect it had on him, the change. And he says, no, I'm glad to know. Or rather, he became silent. I'd prefer to know. There's still some meaningful distinction that he is making between those two things, but yeah, I guess I don't know if it's still value in that emotional. I don't know. What do you think? The emotional transformation.
I just wonder why Philip K. Dick has him take the Mercer like trek. What does he achieve in doing that? You know, that just was not as clear to me.
I thought maybe. Because they're like people are like seeing illusory Mercers toward the end, or maybe no, Isidore I think like is grabbing the empathy box, but like maybe even if something is artificial, it still is real. If we believe that it is all fake, but then he's still having this like meaningful experience through it, does it mean that it doesn't matter if it's real or not? I don't know. I think there are probably many interesting readings of the ending. I don't know if there's, but I felt a little bit at a loss on what exactly I thought about it.
And maybe the discovery of the toad, it's such a random and bizarre, even when you know that it's an electric toad, it's still a very miraculous discovery. So he has this moment of like revelation, like he has this miracle happen where he gets this toad and he has that moment of just like wonder. Yeah. And then he finds out that it's fake, but his wife convinces him that it's still wondrous. Yes. And that's maybe the message we're supposed to take away. Like with Mercerism, does it really matter what's real and what's not, what's human, what's fake, as long as we get the, inspiration from it or the wonder that we need to survive through this terrible apocalyptic world.
Right. And then, also you can be human and be vicious, like Resh. You could have that attitude, or you could be an android and care about your fellow androids. Yeah. Or you could maybe Deckard himself is an android. That's question mark, like we were saying.
And does it matter?
Right.
Yeah.
It's very hard to kind of put your finger on a lot of. I guess that's the point.
This whole story, when you think about it, could be boiled down and simplified and be one of those stories in iRobot.
Yes.
It really would fit in really nicely, even just in terms of how the androids are used in the world as sort of slave labor, and then like escaping onto the Earth, the chase for, trying to hunt out who's real and who's human and who's not. The whole thing feels very Asimovian.
Yeah, I think that's true. But we do get the benefit, of course, of length is that we get to know Deckard better. Even if it's some of the things, like he's pretty blithe about cheating on his wife, and he's pretty like, or I guess he doesn't maybe see that as cheating
because she's an android,
right? Which is that whole interlude is a little bit odd, but we do have more of a sense of transformation, I think, because we've been sitting with him for longer.
Yeah. Hey there, book clubbers. Elle here, interrupting our conversation briefly to bring you to the observation deck. This is a place where people can send in their thoughts, and we might feature them here. This month's observation comes from Zach B. I've been thinking about the title. Dick seems to be asking a question that none of us really want answered. Because if androids can dream and desire just like we do, what is left to distinguish them from us? And what happens when that distinction fully breaks down? Will we have to acknowledge them as equals? As superiors? Well, we should talk about Blade Runner.
Yes.
Which we both rewatched that as well as 2049.
Yeah. One of us rewatched The Magic Flute.
One of us did not.
Right. So, right. And I think we have focused on the novel exclusively for this entire time, but I think it is important. So this is a major part of the reception history of the novel, and I think more so, I don't mean to be snotty about this, but so of course the other adaptation we talked about was iRobot, but I think this is maybe in a different camp where you have a cinematic classic that has been made, a very loose adaptation of the source material that is a tremendous film. It's been analyzed a million times on its own as a film.
Yes.
And so then it is going to be an even bigger part of the reception history than it would be for just sort of like an action flick made loosely tangentially from iRobot.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, it's considered one of the greatest, like it's supposed to be one of the early examples of like cyberpunk, and is so beautiful. I mean, I hadn't seen it in a while. I watched it the other night, and I was just immediately struck by that opening sequence of the city and the fire plumes from the oil rigs or whatever they are.
Yeah.
The soundtrack with those beautiful synths.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that everything seems to be shot in camera, with miniatures or whatever they were using. And the way that strobing lights play off of the scenes with like shadows, and it's just so gorgeously rendered.
Yeah, absolutely.
The angles in the scenes. I'm not really a film scholar, but it just really is visually arresting film.
It is. They go, all in on a very famous example of neo-noir. So I like references to Venetian blinds. There are elements of this in the novel, like we were just talking about, but certainly stylistically, that's a touchstone for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, gorgeous film that functions very differently. They have the replicants. Of course, the term, as people who have read this will realize, Blade Runner and replicant are not what they're called, and it's bounty hunter and android in the book.
Or Andy,
right? But in the movie, they're trying to expand their lifespans.
Yeah,
that's like the motive for them.
Right.
And then, of course, the consensus is that Deckard is a replicant himself. I mean, people have different thoughts.
I don't think so. Again, I'm not convinced by the arguments to say definitively that he is.
Well, I think the sequel would imply that.
I still don't even think the sequel answers the question definitively that Deckard is a human or an android.
So you think that? So Rachel definitely is, and he. I don't know. He said they're hunting us.
Yeah. But I don't think so you read it as Deckard in 2049 as a android?
Yeah.
I thought it could be that his humanness is what brings life into being when combined with the android.
Well, I guess that's a reading available. But I think that like it's often with the like unicorn or origami at the end, it's like him being a replicant is sort of is like a one way people tend to read the film.
Yeah.
And people are reading it with that, trying to like find evidence for that. But it's true. I guess you can say it's.
I think even the film leaves the door open.
But I think if you're maybe slanted slightly towards seeing him as a human, I think the film's slanted to seeing him as a replicant.
With the origami, I think especially.
Yeah, and the kind of odd memories. And, I think. Lots of differences. Obviously, my beloved opera scene isn't in the film. Instead, it's sort of like sexy snake lady.
My condolences.
Well, it's impossible to think of the Harrison Ford, like very neo-noir detective being like, oh, the magic flute. That doesn't really. It's
not the same character,
right? But then they still maintain these kind of like terrifyingly beautiful deaths of the replicants that are unsettling.
Especially the Beatty death.
Yes.
At the end of Blade Runner that's stuck with me, and that's the one thing I remembered vividly from my first time watching it. That he just basically doesn't want to die alone. Yeah, he wants to give a few of his like memories, and he wants to be with somebody. Which is why he saves Deckard from falling, just so he could sit there as he dies.
Right. Well, Roy is he's magnetic. You're drawn to him, and they're in the movie. They're kind of shown differently. They're these like splendid figures. They are. Roy comes across as this Luciferian fallen angel. He's beautiful. He's powerful. He's smart. He's
terrifying.
Yes, he is, and he's but then motivated also by empathy. Is like he doesn't have a lot of time left, but he's trying to save Pris, who of course in the book is a Rachel model, but is Daryl Hannah in the film. I don't think they quite come across as this kind of they're not so splendid in the book. Maybe the closest you get to that is Deckard hearing Luba Luft and being moved. Yeah. But here there's something it's cinematically it's sort of conveyed in a punchier way.
Yeah, and they really punch up the relationship between Deckard and Roy Beatty.
Yeah.
Because in the book, he's like, especially this Beatty, I am drawn to him, or he sort of singles him out as sort of the boss, and he's the one he should be most concerned with, you know.
Right.
But it isn't quite the same relationship as it is in the movie.
No, he's not he's not as sort of impressive. You're sort of swept up in his charisma. He's just sort of this like more of like this brute in the book.
If anything, he's very unceremoniously dispatched in that last scene in the book. The last scene, it's sort of almost like a letdown.
Yeah.
Because you build it up. There's this really, tense moment with the reveal about Mercerism on the TV, along with the torturing of the spider, and then all of a sudden it's like Deckard arrives. That's the other thing that confused me. They have that trap to catch like any human walking through the door. That alarm that's supposed to go off.
Yeah.
And it doesn't.
Oh, yeah.
So that's another thought that, maybe he's an android, because why didn't that alarm? It's like there's a brain activity that's supposed to like trigger.
I forgot that. Yeah.
And it won't work on Isidore because he's a chicken head, so he doesn't have enough of the brain power to like trip the alarm.
Interesting.
But we never hear that alarm go off. So it seems strange that if Deckard is a human being, that he didn't trip the alarm.
Point in the favor of that reading, I guess. Yeah.
Well, maybe I need to reread it, but that seemed weird to me.
I think I would notice more in a reread.
Yeah. And maybe you guys can say in the chat if I'm missing something there. But yeah, I don't know. I just felt like they were sort of uniformly just like, pop, pop, pop.
Right.
Now they're all dead,
Well, yeah, they're lacking it's a little bit matter of fact. And I think like maybe is this unfair, but I think in the movies there is more of a spiritual dimension to part of these things. Like I do think that Roy reads as this like fallen angel type, and I don't really have that read of them in the book. And then in the sequel, which we don't, which is also I think it was very compelling. There's sort of like a messianic figure. There's like there's overtones of that type of thing, like destiny, and I don't know if that's really so much going on in this book. I don't have that element.
Yeah, and in the book, the androids feel sort of like a few, smart cats sitting around with this little mouse.
Right.
Hoping they can outsmart a different mouse that's, looking for them.
Right.
They assume they will be able to, and that they'll be able to just integrate themselves into society and live the rest of their lives. But they don't strike me as, like you said, the splendid people that we see in Blade Runner.
You're right. They're magnificent. It's just shot so well. Or even when the sexy snake lady, Zora, when she's killed, and in the windows, and she's got her little like raincoat on, and
she goes through the glass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's like godlike creatures being murdered. It just is and then you see his reaction, just thinking like
that wasn't great.
I don't. Like souring on his entire career, and
and also the way that they paint his relationship with Rachel obviously is drastically different.
Right.
He actually loves her in the movie.
But doesn't he kind of love her in the book?
I think he is charmed by her and falls for her in some way, but I think in the movie we're meant to think that these two are like soulmates. And of course 2049 solidifies that.
Absolutely. I think she's just obviously very different.
She kills his goat. Yeah. She obviously
vengeance. Yeah, and
he doesn't love her after that.
We're right. And then she in the book she is trying to sabotage him. She's like, "Oh, I'm going to sleep with sleep with these bounty hunters, then they can't do their jobs anymore."
And I think when he leaves that room, that hotel room, he leaves there not being taken with her anymore.
Yeah. That's true.
So it's a different relationship. Obviously, I think they run away together at the end of Blade Runner.
Right.
And he helps her escape, and obviously they form a whole life together. Or they have
briefly.
They would have had they not been hunted.
Right. Is there a version of Blade Runner, the film, that maybe isn't called Blade Runner, that is faithful to the novel, that is as mesmerizing as the non-faithful adaptation is?
I don't know, but I think the choices that they made to make Blade Runner work really well.
Yeah.
I think it's, they're two different stories, but they're both beautiful stories. And I think Philip K. Dick is actually saying a couple more interesting things.
Well, yeah, I think that we are missing in the movie the idea of empathy that's not really a centerpiece. The entire concept of mercerism, that's not there. The mood organ's not there. The sort of electric pets are kind of in there from time to time, but it's not like the centerpiece. You don't have lead cod pieces. You don't have a lot of things like that. Right.
But I think the topsy-turviness, the disorientation, the way that we're forced to question the very fundamental, identities of these people, it's better done, I think, in the Dick novel than it is in the movie. In the movie, it's an easier, more digestible story. Right. But I think this is more interesting.
Right.
But obviously, I think visually, the movie is stunning, and I love that movie.
Right.
But I think, for my money, the story is better in the book.
Did I tell you I made my mom watch it on her birthday?
Oh, that's not the cheeriest.
No, I know, but I was home, and it happened to be her birthday, and she doesn't like movies with unhappy endings, but,
Well, it's not the least happy.
I was like, well, now you'll have an opinion about it, the cinematic classic. But I think you're right about that, because in the movie, I guess like the reading of the movie, it is fashionable to read it as Deckard being a replicant, but it's also totally available to you to not read it that way, and to not really think very hard about whether or not somebody's an android.
What I will say about Blade Runner the movie, though, is it really opened the door for Blade Runner 2049, which I think is another excellent movie, and
it is,
and has a really interesting story.
Yes,
and that story would not really have been possible without some of the choices they made in Blade Runner, the first movie.
Yeah. What choices do you think enabled the sequel?
Well, specifically the relationship between Deckard and Rachel.
Right.
So if they had the events unfold the way they did in the book, it doesn't really open the door for this interesting birth story to happen. And I think that's really cool how they did that. So I feel like I'm happy with how that whole tale unfolded. And I think Blade Runner 2049 is a delight. And I could see it now continuing from there. And I think you mentioned there's going to be a TV show.
Yeah, I think Amazon. We're not even paid to say this.
We're not. We should be, but we're not.
We should be. Amazon, if you're watching.
Hey, Amazon.
Yeah. I think Blade Runner 2099 is, and starring one of our favorite actors, who is Michelle Yeoh.
Oh, I love Michelle.
Love her.
What a treat that they got her.
I know. So, I mean, Sci-Fi Queen, we love her in Star Trek. We love her in... I always get the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once. Star, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. We love her.
Amazing.
So I'm obviously going to be checking that out. But yeah, I think it's nice to read this. And to me, this is just they're two different universes, two different versions of Deckard. They don't really align, but it's really valuable. This is doing something the movies aren't doing. And that's important.
Yeah. Read the book and watch the movie is what I say.
Yeah. And maybe it's a little bit frustrating for longtime fans of Philip K. Dick that this is such an amazing novel, and that people are going to just think it's just that must be kind of irritating, even if the movie is really, truly an excellent movie.
And this is actually exactly how I felt about Man in the High Castle, which is another show. That was a television show on Amazon Prime based on Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick. I will go ahead and say, I think the book is doing something a little bit more interesting, but in some ways the show is more palatable. So it's kind of a trade-off. You cast a wider net, and get more people involved in this beautiful world that is so interesting, has so many interesting things to say, or are you really faithful to a book that might not always resonate and be easily captured visually on film? Exactly,
you relate easily to the characters if you stick with what Philip K. Dick planned in the novel. Will they be as sympathetic? And it's kind of an open question. But yeah, definitely watch both. Both very underperforming at the box office, but
Blade Runner movies.
Yeah.
I think they spent $28 million or something and got 40 some million. So it was still successful, but it wasn't the huge hit that I think we would think it would be.
But sometimes I love this when this happens. A lot of times, however well you think a movie did when it first came out. This is particularly true of older movies. When I'm not even going to get into that whole digression. That's particularly true of older films, even way older than Blade Runner. But then sometimes when you look at what survives from whatever decade, it's not always the ones that make the most money, but clearly there's something here that people want to return to, even if the movie's kind of underperformed.
I mean, science fiction in general is not for everybody, but it is for us, and that's why we are here in this book club.
Indeed.
So thank you for joining us again for Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? We have had the vote on next month's book, and it is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I believe we're just reading the first book, the first novel in that series, because there are a bunch of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy within, I think, what is it, 5 books or something?
I think 5 if it's just the ones that are by the original author. Yeah.
And that gets to be a little bit long, so we decided, just because we know people have limited time, we're just going to discuss the first book in that group of 5. So,
which I have read.
Yes, I have too. It was a while ago.
Yep.
Again, so I look forward to rereading that book.
And watch out for a huge tonal shift in for books. That'll be the first cheerful book that I think we've read so far.
Yeah, anyone who has followed my stuff online knows that I like some humor and some wit, and this will be a nice change of pace. So join us for that. The poll for the following book, for August's book, is now open. Please vote. Should be an interesting group of books to choose from. Really excited to see what you pick. And I think that's about everything.
See you next time.
See you next time. I don't know why I did the TV thumbs up. Buster friendly, folks.
Buster friendly.